Listen, if somebody wants to know whether God exists, whether the Bible is true, ladies and gentlemen, you've waited long enough. The evidence is in. It's overwhelming.
It's over 9,000!
We have to stop pretending, well, who's to say? Science has said.
Science has said.
Science has said it, my fellow apes. Science has said that God exists. And more specifically, science has said that the Bible is true.
The Bible is true.
And that's quite the revelation, huh? So let's find out what precisely this extremely confident man is on about. That we will. We'll be using Eric Metaxas as an example proponent of quite the popular narrative making the rounds as of late, and especially in evangelical circles, namely a resurrection of the resurrection. Christianity, don't you know, is making a grand comeback. Atheism is dead. Yeah, that's a real book, a book written by Eric, and it's a cringe cathedral. But we'll walk through its halls soon. For now, I'd like to thank Masterworks, the sponsor of this video. I've recently invested all I have to turn Rationality Rules from a one-man band into a team, and so having a company invest in us in the form of a sponsorship is greatly appreciated. If you're interested in diversifying your portfolio, then this one's for you. In 2023, passively growing your money by, for instance, investing in the stock market has been suffering. In fact, financial experts, including Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, say that due to the volatility in the markets, now is when you should diversify more than ever. And here's where Masterworks presents a fascinating opportunity. Masterworks is a unique platform that lets you invest in multi-million-dollar art by legends such as Picasso and Banksy, but for a fraction of the full price. All Masterworks' offering circulars with the SEC are linked in the description and at sec.gov. And like all investments, there's risk. But according to Citibank, this art has a very low correlation to other investment-like stocks, so when they dip, your art investments may not. In fact, even with all the economic chaos in 2023, Masterworks has only increased the pace of their sales, and therefore the returns they've handed back. After all, for Masterworks, it's in their best interest to get the highest possible return from selling their art. On this note, since Masterworks sponsored the channel in March, they've sold another 2 paintings, bringing them to a total of 13 exits, all with a positive return. So, if you're looking to diversify your portfolio alongside 700,000 other clients of Masterworks, then be sure to click my link below. Thanks. Let's find out who precisely Eric Metaxas is.
The more science progresses, the more knowledge progresses, the more it makes it intellectually untenable to say there is no God.
Intellectually untenable, huh? Eric is perhaps best known for his long career as a children's author, writing classics such as Donald Builds the Wall, which features Donald wearing red, white and blue, wielding a club with We the People carved into it as he bashes mean monsters. Or here's another one of Eric's children's books, Donald Drains the Swamp. It's based on a true story, don't you know? Oh, just look at these mean monsters clogging up the water. This type of propaganda is good, so we're told. Unlike other children's books of the past, of course. Eric also reached fame as one of the writers of the show VeggieTales, which seeks to convey Christian moral themes and teach biblical values and lessons for a child-based audience.
Hang on, everyone! It'll be all right! This is what God prepared us for!
Now, personally, I'm most looking forward to their episode when they cut off Miss Salad Finger's fingers for grabbing the balls of Mr. Brussels while he fights Professor Broccoli.
Oh my god! The Veggie Fables! I love your religious propaganda clumsily disguised as children's entertainment.
Eric himself likes to point out that people probably know him as the author of books such as Martin Luther and Miracles, as well as the host of the Eric Metaxas radio show, and the founder and host of the Socrates in the Cities Conversation series. Interestingly, Eric has described himself as, get this, the world's foremost authority. About what precisely? No one knows. He's just the self-proclaimed world's authority, okay? Get over it. It says so right here on his website, named after Socrates. You know, before we move on, we've really got to soak this one up. This is a full-course meal of irony, and as someone who's a Brit, I'm sure you can appreciate, It's actually illegal for me not to give this the podium. The man who boasts of being the world's foremost authority is in charge of a website named after the man who humbly claimed to know nothing. Yeah, bask in the cringe, my dudes, because this is only gonna get worse. And as to why it's gonna get worse, well, Eric tells us straight up.
Why? Because I'm crazy?
Well, Eric is the world's foremost authority, and so we couldn't possibly disagree with him here. Moving on, this level of cringe isn't rare for Eric. He's an extremely unprincipled and contradictory person. For instance, when it comes to something he doesn't favour, he argues that the government must not be able to tell its citizens what to do.
And I think, again, Americans need to understand, if the government or everybody is telling you you have to do something, we don't have dissent, no dissent, you need to understand that's not the American way, folks.
But when it comes to things he does favour, he insists that the government should be able to dictate the lives of its citizens.
If maniacal Christians took control of this country, they would make it safe for everybody else to be a part of this country. So do not fear theocracy, folks. That is a chimera. That is nonsense, a mirage.
Now, I don't know about you, but I'm getting pretty damn tired of religious conservatives preaching selective freedom. Come on, guys, like seriously. A principle isn't a principle until it costs you. If you're in favour of free speech only if people say things that you like, you're not in favour of free speech.
Do not fear theocracy, folks.
Stop pretending you're for freedom. Now, we could go on for a very, very long time, but we've got to wrap this chapter up. One of Eric's most successful pieces of content is his article titled "Science Increasingly Makes the Case for God," which he explains in his book titled "Atheism is Dead," went viral as soon as it was published.
The article went online on Christmas Eve in 2014 and appeared in the print edition on Christmas Day. Only hours afterward, it had been shared on Facebook thousands of times with hundreds of comments.
Eric spends a large portion at the start of his book filleting himself by giving an anecdote of being spotted while on a family skiing resort and boasting of 100,000 Facebook shares.
Soon, the Facebook shares hit 100,000.
And, well, Eric goes on for quite some time, but you get the point. His article garnered a great reception, and so he decided to write the aforementioned book based upon it.
But it is because of the response to that article that I have written this book.
And what we're going to do in this series is use Eric as a vehicle to appreciate evangelical claims. Without further ado, let's get to it.
Introduction. The Grand Counter-Narrative. We are living in unprecedentedly exciting times, but most of us don't know it yet. That's essentially the point of this book, to share the news that what many people have dreamt of and others have believed could never happen has happened, or at any rate is happening this very minute and has been happening for some time. By this, I mean the emergence of inescapably compelling evidence for God's existence.
Yeah, we're going down the rabbit hole from the very get-go, and it's going to become all the more explicit within a few minutes. Eric's introductory title of The Grand Counter-Narrative,
The Grand Counter-Narrative,
is one in which secular elites are well aware of what he calls inescapably compelling evidence for God's existence, but they're deliberately hiding this evidence from the world, from you. Yeah, this is another case of a religious conservative portraying secular people as mean monsters in need of a good old bash.
Although such evidence has been appearing for decades, the culture hasn't much noticed it or spoken of it. And more recently, such evidence has been accelerating. But we are generally still stuck in the secular narrative that reached its apogee in the 1966 Time magazine cover article with the infamous title, "Is God Dead?"
Throughout his book, Eric mentions this Time magazine article several times, often reminding us of its year of publication, which fits his grand counter-narrative of secular elites hiding the evidence for God's existence. But this isn't the only role the 1966 article has in Eric's play. No, it also represents, as he puts it, the supposed apogee, the climax of atheism, which has since been steadily fading into death as a new wave of specifically Christian vindication has unfolded. I know, this is completely backwards. What we're witnessing here is simple projection. Eric is accusing others, pretty much anyone else in this case, including most Christians, of doing what he's doing, so that if someone calls him out, it will come across as pretty petty. As in, No, I'm not weaving a grand counter-narrative. You are. This reverse Uno card is lazy, but it's rhetorically effective. We've got to give him that. It doesn't, however, hold any water.
More importantly, our rather disproportionately secular cultural leaders were quite sure it was settled. So when any evidence came their way to the contrary, they tended to ignore it, since it so clearly defied the trend toward secularization that everyone had already accepted. It is more than anything because of this that the rest of us haven't heard much.
Okay, let's take the time to appreciate the assertions Eric has just made. First, he claimed that cultural leaders, presumably from 1966 through to today, are typically secular.
Our rather disproportionately secular cultural leaders.
And by secular, what precisely does Eric mean? Well, he's already made this clear in the paragraph we're reviewing, and he makes it even clearer throughout his book. Secular people are, according to Eric, anti-religious people, actively ignoring evidence of God's existence because the evidence doesn't fit their narrative.
So when any evidence came their way to the contrary, they tended to ignore it, since it so clearly defied the trend toward secularization that everyone had already accepted.
Eric defining secularism this way, of course, reveals that he either hasn't a clue of what secularism is, or, like his best buddy Dennis Prager, he's all too happy to misrepresent it. We thoroughly went over the definition of secularism in our first episode on Dennis's ultimate master's professor red pill PhD program, and so we'll keep it brief here. Secularism is defined as the separation of religious institutions from state institutions, and a public sphere where religion may participate but not dominate. Hence, secularism is a position that's independent of whether God exists. One could believe in God and yet still opt for a secular society. But no, not according to Eric. He insists that secularism entails ignoring evidence for God's existence as to maintain an anti-God trajectory. But here's the thing, even using his definition of secularism, we're left empty-handed. He offers no evidence anywhere in his book to support the claim that the anti-religious are ignoring the truth. He's relying entirely on his audience buying his claims based on their intuitions and biases. So no, he doesn't consider such facts as, to scratch the surface, Thomas Jefferson being the only president in the history of the US to have not identified as a Christian, with Abraham Lincoln being a murky potential second. Hence, from 1966 through to today, every single president has been a Christian. And no, Eric doesn't note that despite as of 2021, while 1 in 4 US adults are unaffiliated with a religion, only 1 in 500 of Congress reflect this. I mean, does the president and Congress not count as cultural leaders in Eric's mind? Or are they just pretending, being part of the secular conspiracy? Or are they just not evangelical enough? Maybe it's that. Maybe Eric considers every Christian not as zealous as him to be secular. My, we're in quite the mess here. But make no mistake about it, this is a feature, not a bug. Such grand counter-narratives, as we're witnessing here, thrive on murky definitions, bold assertions, and, to be blunt, the ignorance and deep desires of the audience. Anyhow, according to Eric, it's because of this grand conspiracy that we don't all today so easily recognize God's existence.
But while all of us were sleeping through the decades, and assuming the religious tide was going further and further out, never to return, something happened. The wind shifted. And for some time now, the tide has been returning, slowly but steadily.
Eric would have us believe that since 1966, where atheism had its zenith, the religious tide has very much been coming into shore. But is this true? Does he offer any evidence for this claim? Drum roll, please. No, he doesn't.
Those hostile to such evidence and those friendly to it were equally oblivious. Somehow, over the years, I've had the good fortune to stumble across books in which bits of this evidence have appeared and have quietly been making mental notes.
Don't you just love how Eric has painted himself as Sherlock Holmes, uncovering the conglomerate of lies underpinning modern civilization? He alone has had to break into the closets of hostile secular institutions, avoiding the monsters as he pieces together evidence so compelling for God's existence as to render it intellectually untenable for the world not to immediately fall to their knees. Truly, he's a children's author, alright. Didn't know he also wrote adult fantasy though. What a guy.
Because I'm crazy.
Our primary goal in this opening episode has been to appreciate the evangelical rhetoric of Eric, and especially his overflowing confidence and narrative control. To effectively deal with his claims in future installments, we need to appreciate his mentality, which we now have a decent grasp of. But to get a firmer grip, let's see just how deep the rabbit hole goes by trying out some of those secret doors.
Since the Time article in 1966, roughly 5 things have arisen to challenge and, I will argue, to overturn the secular consensus that formed in the wake of that article.
So let's hear them out. Are you ready for the secrets to finally be exposed? Are you ready for your baptism?
The first is the discovery of what we call the Big Bang.
Bro, I don't know what circles you're in, but we know about the Big Bang. This isn't hidden. In fact, I have to correct theists who misuse Big Bang cosmology all the time.
In discovering that the universe had a clear beginning, we realized there was a point at which all the laws of physics and all of matter and energy did not exist.
You see, I'm having to do it now. No, Eric, the Big Bang doesn't state that before it there was no matter or energy. Stop confidently spewing nonsense. Pretty please with a cherry on top.
The second thing, which we have already mentioned, is our discovery in the last decades of the increasingly overwhelming evidence of so-called fine-tuning in the universe.
Fine-tuning, you say? What's that? I don't think I've ever heard of fine-tuning. The secular elite have really hidden this one from me. I'll tell you what, I'm going to write them a finely tuned angry letter. No, wait, I have issued objections to fine-tuning arguments many times over.
The third major shift in the last decades has to do with our views on how life emerged from non-life on the early Earth, often called abiogenesis.
For crying out loud, this secret is so well hidden that Eric can't even pronounce it.
Abiogenesis.
It's abiogenesis, not abiogenesis.
It's Leviosa.
Thanks also to the world's premier nanoscientist, James Tour.
Really, Eric? You're going to pedestal the creationist James Tour, the dude that's been ripped several new assholes by Professor Dave?
So when you say that selection can't exist on a prebiotic Earth, you are doing nothing but demonstrating your spectacular ignorance towards an entire subfield of chemistry.
Huh?
Yes, he is. Eric cuddles up to other creationists too, such as Stephen Meyer. You see, the mindset and narrative needed to buy into a secular conspiracy to hide evidence is also the mindset needed to buy into many conspiratorial and pseudoscientific propositions. This is why I've chosen Eric as a vehicle for this claim. He's a quintessential evangelical.
Thanks also to the world's premier nanoscientist, James Tour of Rice University, we know how difficult it is to create molecules even under the best controlled conditions.
Do we? Really? I wonder, what are the best controlled conditions? Seriously, tell us what they are, Eric. Because this tired old divine fallacy, otherwise known as an argument from incredulity, isn't fooling anyone. It's no better than if the ancient Greeks insisted that we'd never fly because they couldn't achieve it under what they considered to be the best controlled conditions. How on earth does Eric or James know what the best controlled conditions are? Well, you guessed it, they don't. So what's the fourth hidden piece of evidence the elite don't want us to see, huh?
The fourth thing that has happened over the last decades concerns archaeological discoveries in the Middle East.
You know what? I haven't really delved into archaeological arguments at all, and so we'll do that thoroughly soon. Until then, though, allow me to tease it.
That archaeology continues to uncover evidence that what the Bible says is history. And it happens over and over and over.
And what's the fifth and final hidden proof?
The fifth thing that has changed in recent years is our knowledge of what atheism is, both theoretically and practically.
Oh,
For example, we've had the time to observe the lives of various atheists, such as Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Antony Flew, to see whether any of them were able to live out their philosophies in a way that was inspiring or even merely logical.
So, first of all, atheism isn't a philosophy. All three of the specific names Eric chose had very different beliefs, and one of them, Antony Flew, converted to theism. This, of course, is something he milks in his book, claiming that real atheism ends in depression and disaster, and that's why Antony gave it up. Eric also claims that Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus converted on their deathbeds, both of which are based on a single dubious witness.
We've had the opportunity to see which of them most honestly grappled with the eternal question of God's existence and what they eventually came to believe.
Ah, I see. An honest atheist is one who isn't an atheist. Brilliant. Good to know. I now understand how to argue effectively. The next time I want to speak about the average Christian, I'll be sure to select pedo priests. That's how it works, right?
We've also had the opportunity to watch the decades-long careers of atheist states like the former Soviet Union China, Nazi Germany, and North Korea.
How are so many prominent theists absurdly ignorant of history? Imagine confidently claiming that Nazi Germany was atheist. What utter tripe! Anyhow, there's the 5 hidden pieces of evidence that Eric dug up from the cellars of the secular elite with his sublime detective skills, and he's accusing cultural leaders of hiding these crucial facts and arguments from you, be it universities and colleges, research institutions, and governments and legislative bodies. They're all in on it. The world is against you. Don't trust the secular elite. They're mean, mad monsters against all that's good in the world. But the truth is that none of this supposed overwhelming evidence is hidden. Eric brings nothing new to the table. At best, he's championing old arguments that have been discussed at great length in journals and even live debates. And at worst, he's completely misrepresenting evidence. But in either case, we find in Eric no admission of any room for rational disagreement, with much of his one-dimensional thinking being explicitly predicated on conspiracies. For instance, Eric assures us that Joe Biden isn't the president of the United States.
I mean, there's a lot of the stuff that's been going on, whether it's with the vaccines or whether it's with the voting fraud or whatever.
But I guess this isn't all that surprising, given his other books, huh? The conspiratorial nature we've witnessed today isn't rare. It is, in fact, the modus operandi of Eric and his kin. The key takeaway here is that when debating the likes of Eric, our differences don't come down to a few areas of rational disagreement. No, it comes down to us having completely different realities. The Christian Copian counter-narrative that Eric champions is to the average atheist, and perhaps also the average theist, completely bonkers. But like it or not, Eric represents a lot of people. As of 2019, it's still the case that 1/3 of US adults reject evolution. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to our wonderful patrons and YouTube members. We've got huge plans for the channel, and we can't do them without you. Thank you.
So God killed everyone. The good guys. The bad guys. And even Steve.